Sentire Media.
Well, hello there, and welcome back to another episode of A New Life in Italy, the podcast where we break down everything you need to know about living, working, and thriving in this beautiful country. I'm Samantha Wilson, and today we're tackling an incredibly important topic and one that has many people quite confused. So picture this. You've decided to move to Italy. You've figured out what visa you qualify for, and then, surprise, you discover that before you can even apply for the visa, you need to rent a property in Italy. And this has to be done before you apply and even before you know if you'll even get the visa. And this rental requirement can catch a lot of people off guard, and it's something that isn't always made clear early on. So today's episode is going to focus on that very issue, the need to rent a property in Italy before applying for a visa and all of the potential problems that come with it. We'll talk about how you can make this happen, including the different types of rental leases that will qualify for your visa, the common challenges foreigners face when trying to secure a rental, and how much time and money you should budget for this crucial step. We'll also explain what visas require a residential address, why short-term solutions like Airbnbs or hotels will not work to qualify for your visa, and how to plan the timing of your rental search so that it coordinates with your visa application and you aren't left paying months of rent before you arrive. So if you are planning to move to Italy but need a rental to qualify for that coveted visa, this episode is for you. I'm Samantha Wilson, Chief Dreammaker at smartmoveitaly.com, and this is A New Life in Italy, a show where each week I take you behind the scenes of what it's really like to move to Italy, introduce you to some fascinating people, answer your questions, and show you how starting a new life in Bel Paese is possible for you. So let's just dive in. One of the biggest challenges for foreigners applying for long-term visas in Italy is securing a rental property ahead of time. And let me remind you, a long-term visa for Italy, it's called a national D visa. There's lots of other words people use, but really it's a national D visa. This is a visa up to 365 days. Like many European countries, Italy requires proof of a residential address as part of the visa application process. And this means that you can't just book an Airbnb for a few months or show up and find a place once you've already landed. You actually need to have a valid lease agreement. You need to know where you're going to live before you even submit your visa application. Now, not all visas require a place to live in advance. The ones that do, however, are the most popular, like the elective residency visa, or the student visa, or the new digital nomad visa. Even the family reunification, they all need a place to live before you even apply for it. But also, if you intend to apply for your citizenship in person, you will also need a lease in advance of your arrival. So it's really important to get this done early. Now, the visa that doesn't require a place to live, well, you guessed it, my favorite visa, the investor visa, but all other ones typically do. Now, not all leases, by the way, are created equal, surprise, surprise, and this is where it gets just a little bit tricky. Italy has three main kinds or main types of legal residential leases, and only certain ones will qualify for your visa application. And here's why. Your national D visa is valid for 365 days. That's 1 year or 12 months. Therefore, you need to prove that you have a place to live in Italy for exactly that, for 12 months. But many people will search for longer-term contracts, residential contracts, to give them some security and commitment from the owner because, you're planning to move here and live here and you want something for longer than just 12 months. So let's break these leases down and figure out how you can time your process better. The first kind of lease I want to mention is the transitorio lease. Now, this is a short-term lease, typically between 1 to 18 months. It cannot be renewed, so only up to 18 months. And it's designed for temporary stays. It's commonly used by students or workers from one region moving into another on a temporary basis. They're, short-term contract kind of people. That's who is looking and will usually get a transitorio lease. Now, sometimes elective residency visa or student visas, this is the perfect lease for you. And while it may seem like an easy option, a transitorio lease can qualify for certain visas, but not for all of them. This lease typically is accepted for ERVs or even the digital nomad, where short-term residency can be justified. For example, let's say you're moving here as a retired person on the ERV and you're planning to buy, but you need to come here first for a year or 18 months as you're looking for a property to buy. This is a temporary reason and often will work, although it's not in the legislation, for the transitorio lease. So it's important to check with your specific consulate to ensure that this kind of a lease, a transitorio lease, will work for your visa, because some will not accept it. Also, let's talk a little bit about timing right now. You will need to secure your lease in advance of your appointment, and your visa approval can take up to 90 days to get. Therefore, your lease will need to be longer than 12 months because you need a little bit of wiggle room for any delays. Now, the 12-month lease must be from your anticipated arrival date in Italy, not the appointment at the consulate. So always keep that arrival date in mind when you're planning. Now, the next kind of lease is a 4+4. This is a very standard long-term residential lease in Italy. It lasts for 4 years with the option to renew for another 4 years. It is the most common type of rental agreement for those looking to establish a long-term presence. You're moving to Italy. So this is the kind of lease that is the best one to get. If you're applying for the elective residency visa, this is typically the kind of lease that you will show, and one that we really do recommend, because a 4+4 lease demonstrates to the authorities that you're committed to living in Italy for the long haul, which is exactly what many visa types require. Also in Italy, any lease can be terminated by the tenant with 6 months' notice. So don't panic or freak out about having an 8-year lease locked in, because you can break it with 6 months' notice without penalty. You are really always on just this 6-month rotating lease if you look at it that way. And if you get the 4 years, you are settled in and you have the freedom and the security to stay put while you complete the often very lengthy permesso di soggiorno process. So if you can, I do recommend for these visas, especially the elective residency visa, to get a 4+4. Now, the other residential lease is a 3+2, and this is slightly shorter. Of course, it's 3 years with a 2-year renewal, and it's similar to the 4+4 in that it's long-term and it's stable, which makes it suitable for the elective residence or similar visas. It's often used in areas with rent control or where rent is set at an agreed upon rate. So the 3+2 is not available everywhere, just in some areas. And the quirky thing about it is you have to prove that you have a residency in the property for the 3+2. So this might be a little bit of a hiccup for some of you. But like the 4+4, this lease type works well for long-term visas. And again, in law, you can break the lease with 6 months' notice. Now, one thing I want to make clear is what won't work. So what does not work for a visa? And that is a short-term stay in an Airbnb, a hotel booking, or simply just staying with friends or family, or even using a declaration of hospitality. This will not work for your visa. And if you have friends that own a vacation home in Italy and they tell you you can stay there, make sure they write one of those official leases and register it with the tax office, or it will not work for you. Don't be surprised if your friends suddenly do not want to write a lease. And this is because when it's registered with the tax office, they will be obligated to pay 26% tax on that rental income. Unless, of course, they qualify for dry coupon, which is a special tax regime. But in often foreigners who own properties here as their second homes do not qualify for that. So you need a proper rental contract that's legally registered with the tax office in Italy. Without the registration, it does not work. And as you can see, there isn't a quick fix to secure a rental for a visa, which is why so many people work with estate agencies that understand the Italian rental market and they know how to manage your needs. And trust me, this process can take a long time, almost up to 3 months, sometimes even longer. And just because you see a property online for rent within your budget and you like it, it looks perfect, this doesn't mean you can rent it or that the owner will rent it to you. Nothing in Italy is purely transactional. There's always more. There's always more to this story. So let's talk about some of the challenges that you will face when looking to secure a rental for your visa. Many foreigners are surprised at how difficult it can be to secure a rental in Italy because they're thinking in this transactional way. So here are some of the most common issues. First of all, it's the language barrier. That's almost always the first problem. If you're not fluent in Italian, negotiating with landlords, talking to agents over the phone or Zoom or Skype or however you do it is difficult. And navigating the legal aspects of the rental process can be a really big challenge if you do not understand Italian. And many landlords, quite frankly, prefer to rent to locals or people that they can speak with rather than somebody who doesn't speak their language. So language is one of the biggest problems. It not only will slow you down, but it also, will impact your relationship with the owner and with the agency that you're trying to work with. The next is proving your financial stability. So landlords will always ask for proof of income or a job contract to ensure that you can afford the rent. And if you're moving to Italy without a local job, which some of you may be, if you're on, let's say you're a digital nomad or you're elective resident, then you won't have a job here. And this can be a real problem, a real stumbling block. It's also challenging to explain your income to the landlord, again, if you don't have the language skills, which can ultimately be the make or break point in your success because the landlord's just really concerned that you're going to pay the rent and, not stop paying and never leave and squat in the apartment. Because in Italy, it can take a very long time to get you out. It can take up to 2 years for a landlord to go to the judge and get you removed from the property if you're not paying rent. So this is one of his or her biggest concerns. So be prepared for them to scrutinize your income. And relationships matter here. So having someone to vouch for you will really go a long way in giving the owner or the landlord confidence in you. And then finally, prepare for the upfront costs of renting. Typically, you'll need to budget for at least 2, probably 3 months rent upfront as a security deposit. Now, in law, owners are only permitted to ask for 3 months damage deposit. That is, they can't ask for more. But in some occasions, they may agree to an advanced rental payment of 6 or maybe 12 months rent. And sometimes this is the only thing that will get it over the line. In addition to the deposits or prepaid rent, you may need to pay commission. That is typically equal to the first month's rent to cover agency fees. And in some locations, agents charge between 10 and 15% of the annual rent, the total annual rent, for commission. So it can be an extra expense that many people forget to budget for. Now, I want you also to think about the long lead times. Finding the right property can take longer than you expect, especially in popular areas. Cities like Rome and Florence and Milan, rentals go really, really fast. So you have to be ready to act as soon as you find the one that you like. But you should always allow for at least a few months to secure a place, especially if you're looking for a long-term lease that will qualify for your visa. And by a few, I mean at least 3 months. And don't be surprised and disappointed if your first, second, or maybe even third attempt fails. It's not easy here to find an owner to rent to a foreigner, so be persistent and keep moving on. If one doesn't work, don't try to convince the owner. Just forget it, cut and run, and go to the next one. You don't have time to try to convince the Italian owner that you are who he wants you to be. It's just never going to work. So now that you know the types of leases and some of the challenges, let's talk about how you can make the process a lot easier for yourself. Now, the first thing I recommend is to work with a rental agency or property finder or a friend if they're here to help you. If you're feeling really overwhelmed by the idea of finding a rental on your own, especially if you're not here, especially if you're abroad, I highly recommend working with a rental agency or a property finder or even your friend. Now, of course, we have a full rental team here at Smart Move that helps foreigners find property to rent, but we're not the only ones. So the point is just get help. You will need it. And professionals know the market. They know it inside out. They can help you navigate the paperwork. They can save you a ton of time and, of course, mistakes. They can negotiate with the landlord. They will vouch for you, which is so important for you. And they can make sure that what you're renting meets the requirements for your visa, because there's no point if you spend all this time and money, end up renting a place that doesn't qualify for your visa. And when you work with a rental agency, you can expect to pay a commission to them as well. So this is important to understand. Sometimes your commission will only be to your rental agent, so to your representative agent. But in other cases, you may also need to pay the listing agent as well. So that means 2 commissions. And be prepared for this extra cost if you use an agent. And although it can feel like a lot of money, if your visa is hanging on the edge of getting a proper rental agreement that you will be happy with, feel safe in, want to call your home, this will be well worth the extra. Plus the time that it's going to take you to chase agents from afar, get the details that you understand in time for your visa is valuable, and wasting time and wasting money, all of these things will come into play if you try to go it alone. Now, again, a rental agency or a friend, somebody to help you along the way will definitely help you. Now, next, I want you to factor in the time, and this is a big one. Start the rental process early, but not too early. Depending on where you're looking, finding a property can take anywhere from a few weeks to many months. So make sure you have plenty of time to secure your rental before you need to apply for your visa. It's better to have too much time than to be scrambling around at the last minute. And I recommend with starting by picking your anticipated arrival date and then work backwards from there. You shouldn't start looking for a rental earlier than 3 months from when you want to start the lease. And that's because owners don't want to sign a lease that starts so far into the future. They want the rent money now. And that means if you hope to arrive, for example, in March, start your rental search in January. But here is where it gets a little bit tricky. You need the lease for your visa application, right? And your visa application can take up to 3 months for a decision. So what happens if you have the lease and it starts and you haven't received your visa yet? Well, then you have to pay rent until you do. But if you time it right, you may get lucky and only have to pay a month or a little bit more of rent prior to your arrival. It's one of those unavoidable things, I know, but if you plan properly and your consultant is really quick with their visa, then it won't be too bad. But it's better to have a property in advance. Think of it like short-term pain, long-term gain. This is the best advice I can give you. Now, the next thing I need you to remember is to check your consulate first. Visas like the elective residency visa, digital nomad, and even some student visas require you to have residential address lined up before you apply. Now, make sure you know the exact rental lease requirements first, because not all consulates are the same, and they change their criteria often. In some, a transitorio lease will not work, and others it will. So check first and make sure that you're signing the right one. And then the last thing I want you to think about is do not ask the owner for an out clause in your lease. So if you tell an owner that there's a risk that you will not get the visa and therefore not continue with the rent, he is going to walk away. He's going to run away. So you don't want to do that. But remember that in law, you have 6 months termination notice without penalty. So what I suggest is this: instead of asking for an out clause, ask the owner for a special provision. Ask them to change that 6-month out clause to 3 months. This way, if your visa is denied, you can give your notice immediately and then come to Italy for 3 months for the 90 days without a visa and use your rental as your home base. So not all will be lost. And hopefully, if you've done your visa correctly, this won't be an issue for you. All right, let's recap. If you're planning to move to Italy and apply for the visa, securing the right rental property ahead of time is crucial. You need to understand the different types of leases, like transitorio, 4+4, or 3+2. And make sure that the one you choose qualifies for your visa by checking with the consulate in advance. Avoid relying on short-term solutions like Airbnb, hotels, or staying with friends because they simply won't work. Now, there's plenty of challenges when it comes to finding a rental as a foreigner, from language barriers to budget concerns, but knowing what to expect and planning ahead can make the process a lot smoother. And make sure you budget enough time and money, and don't be afraid to ask for help from a rental agency or even a property finder or even a friend. And finally, if you're feeling completely overwhelmed by the process, reach out to our rental team because we specialize in finding properties that meet visa requirements, and we would be happy to help you navigate the ins and outs of renting a place in Italy. Now, take a deep dive into the rabbit hole of rental property sites and go have fun. It's time for listener questions. Just like the old radio call-in shows, my team has picked 3 listener questions, all left on our voicemail. I have no idea what these questions are, but I haven't been stumped yet. Are you ready? Let's get started.
Good morning, Samantha. This is Brenda Lee, and I'm just wondering if you give me an idea of how much does it cost to live in Italy? Thank you.
So how much income do you need to live in Italy? This is a question. I guess there's 2 ways I can answer that. One is how much can you live the way you're living now in Italy? And one is legally, how much money do you need to live in Italy? So the first one is it really depends on your lifestyle, where you're living in Italy. Obviously, the north is more expensive than the south of Italy. But you should factor into, do a little budget before thinking about your rent or your, if you own a property, you probably don't have a mortgage, so that'll help you. But if you have rent, factor in how much you're paying rent. Think about cost of living. Use a website called Numbeo, Numbeo, and I'll put that in the show notes. This will help you estimate what your daily costs of living are, and then see if you meet that requirement to live in the standard that you want to live in. And then to think about the question, maybe it's how much income do you need to live in Italy legally? This will depend on the visa that you're getting. So if you're doing an elective residency visa, it's a lot. It's going to be, the numbers are about 32,000 a person, but really it's more like 40,000 euros a year in passive income per person. Student visa, it really depends on how long you're staying, but typically you should have the minimum amount, which is around 8,700 in your bank account. This is sort of the line in Italy that they use as far as the income goes. But those are the 2 things to think about. And the best thing is to always plan ahead and think about what you want and how you want to live and whether or not you can do what you want to do to make your life perfect here.
Hi, Sam. My name is Evelyn. My question is it hard to live in Italy as a foreigner? I look forward to your reply. Thank you.
Oh, is it hard to live in Italy as a foreigner? This is a really good question with not an easy answer because it depends on the person. I get this question, I get it a lot from people that I speak to, specifically Americans actually. And they ask me, how do Italians feel about Americans living in Italy? And I always answer the same thing. I always answer, it depends on you. It depends on what kind of person you are. If you are an obnoxious, horrible person in any country, they're not going to like you. Nobody will like you. So, I think that, is it hard to live in Italy as a foreigner? Let's put aside whether or not there's bias against foreigners. And let's just talk about life here. And life is a lot different than it will be in your home country. So some foreigners find it difficult because of course, the bureaucracy is really a nightmare and it doesn't make any sense, which can be frustrating for a lot of personalities. So that's probably the biggest thing that makes it difficult. And I'm going to take that back. That's not the biggest thing. The biggest thing is the language. A lot of times foreigners have the intention to learn the language, but when they get here, they get busy and they find their way without being fluent. And before they know it, it's quite a few years and they're still not fluent. And life just starts to get a little bit harder as your life gets more complicated, which it does as you sort of fall out of the honeymoon and the vacation stage. All of the other things like taxes and life set in. So you start to need to learn the language more. So is it hard to live? I think there's hard spots for sure. There's bumps. And I talk all the time about why you need to know why you've moved in the first place, to lean on that. But it's as hard as you want to make it. Every one of those things I mentioned, you have control over. So if you decide to learn the language to make it easier for you, good on you. If not, then just expect it to be a little more bumpy than other people.
Hi, Sam. Quick question. How much does it cost to go to see a doctor in Italy?
So how much does it cost to see a doctor in Italy? Well, if you are on the healthcare system, the national healthcare system here in Italy, you do not pay to see your family doctor. That's all free. However, if you go see a specialist, if your doctor has referred you, then you may need to take or pay a ticket. We call them tickets. They're just little fees for tests like blood or x-rays, things like that. They're 10, 20 euros, nothing much. If you decide to see a private doctor, which a lot of foreigners do because of the language, you can pay for a regular doctor checkup or visit, between 50 and 70 euros for that visit. If you go see a specialist in a private doctor, it's about 100 to 150 euros to see that doctor. Certain tests, major tests you'll have to pay for, and they could be a few hundred euros, really depending. If you are from some countries where the healthcare is super expensive, this will be music to your ears. But if you want to, again, not pay a lot for your healthcare and you move here on a visa, you can subscribe eventually when you're eligible as a resident. You can apply and pay a very, my opinion, not a very high fee, about 2,000 euros a year to enroll into the public healthcare system and get all of these things for free or just the cost of a small ticket. Well, that's all for this week's episode. Thank you for listening. If you have any questions about visas, citizenship, property, and really anything about moving to Italy that you would like me to answer in an upcoming episode, please feel free to send us a voicemail at our website at smartmoveitaly.com/podcast, or just click on the links in the show notes. Thanks again for listening, and remember, you can find all of the resources and the links to the people and the places that I mentioned in this episode inside the show notes. Ciao for now. A New Life in Italy podcast is a production of Sentire Media, created and hosted by me, Samantha Wilson. Production by London Nero, and with special thanks to Ali Frothingham, Sofia Pisana, and the entire team at Sentire. Follow A New Life in Italy wherever you get your podcasts. And hey, if you're thinking of moving to Italy, whether full-time, part-time, or for a lifetime, come and see me over at smartmoveitaly.com and we'll help you get here and start living your best life. And don't forget, if you love this episode, please rate and leave a review. It's much appreciated. I can't wait to meet up with you again next week, same time, same place. Ciao for now.
Sentire Media.
Well, hello there, podcast listeners. Quick heads up before we get started on the show today. For anyone dreaming of retiring to Italy, my live elective residency visa workshop is back, and it's better than ever. I'm going live on April the 14th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. But don't stress if you can't make it live, because there is always a replay. Now, this workshop is invaluable and has helped hundreds of people nail their elective residency visa application. And considering how tricky getting this visa has become and all of the myths floating around, this 90-minute session with a live Q&A with me really is your ticket to clarity. I'm going to be diving into everything you need to know: what the ERV is, assembling your documents, and proving your financial viability, plus a whole lot more. You will also have access to my ERV workbook, which is full of templates and tips that has really helped a lot of my clients succeed. In fact, at a recent consulate appointment, a client just wrote saying they said it could take 90 days, but when they saw that our application packet was based on your workbook, they just smiled and said, "Come back next week." So yes, my success rate is 100%, and this workshop will be the best investment for your visa prep. Remember, I only do this 2 times a year, so if you're eyeing Italy in the next 12 months, now is the time to get in. Grab your spot. It's only $67. You're saving $30 if you register before April the 2nd, and spots are going fast, so don't wait too long. If you want some more information, visit us at smartmoveitaly.com/ERV live. I hope to see you there. Now, on with the show.